I just finished watching Salem's Lot from HBO Max, and I got a few questions in mind. First, why did Barlow need a human sacrifice before he could take over Salem's Lot? Second, why was Salem's Lot chosen by Barlow, and where is it exactly? Besides being afraid of the sunlight and crosses, what other powers and weaknesses do vampires have in Salem's Lot? Can a rabies vaccine cure a vampire bite? Who is Hubert Marson, the previous owner of the mansion Barlow bought? What happens to Salem's Lot after killing Barlow? Is Barlow really dead? Hello everyone, my name is Michael. I like to talk about movies, so much in fact that I just have to share my thoughts with anyone who can relate. If you're the kind of person who enjoys content like this, please consider subscribing. Salem's Lot is a traditional vampire story featuring familiar elements. Vampires dislike holy water, they fear the sunlight, and anyone bitten by a vampire will also become a vampire. I generally don't enjoy these kinds of stories because they feel overdone and similar movies are often predictable. The book was written by Stephen King in 1975. If you had read it back then, you might have enjoyed it more since it would have seemed fresh and new at that time. Salem's Lot is about a writer named Ben Mears who comes back to the town where he grew up, but he left because of a tragic accident. When he returns, he quickly falls in love with a woman named Susan and becomes friends with a teacher named Mr. Burke. Meanwhile, a new middle school student named Mark arrives. Sadly, the first two friends Mark makes are soon killed. Before long, Ben and Mark discovers that Salem's Lot is being taken over by vampires. Together with Susan and Mr. Burke, they try to warn everyone about the vampires as time runs out and more people start to change. They found out that the main vampire is a man named Barlow, who recently moved into the creepy old house that had been empty for a long time. Did I like the movie Salem's Lot? Not really. I would not even recommend it to my friends. If you want a movie that will genuinely scare you and stick with you afterward, this is not that movie. I have not read the book, so I can't compare it to the movie, and I know it's a remake, but have not seen that version either. So I just did some research to answer some questions. Why did Barlow need human sacrifice before he could take over Salem's Lot? In a scene when Ralphie and his brother Danny are walking home, they are approached by Richard Stryker in a car, who offers them a ride. When they said no, he kidnaps Ralphie. Kurt Barlow has targeted Jerusalem's Lot, but in order to take over, a human sacrifice is necessary to consecrate the town. This is a ritual that lets Barlow start his activities, turning people into vampires and leading the town's destruction. Answer me. Ralph is the first to be infected. He then goes to feed on Danny. The two begin to move around Jerusalem's Lot, turning the inhabitants into vampires on behalf of Barlow. Danny feeds on Mike and on and on. Why was Salem's Lot chosen by Barlow to wreak havoc on, and where is it exactly? Barlow selects Salem's Lot because it's a dying town. The sketchy real estate agent at the beginning of the movie shows how corruption affects life there, and when the first child goes missing, most people just overlooked it. In the book, Barlow also explains that he prefers small towns to big cities because they feel more familiar to him. Like many locations in Stephen King's stories, Jerusalem's Lot is not a real town. However, it is said to be the actual Cumberland County in Maine. Since Stephen King lives in Maine, he often set his stories there. What are the powers and weaknesses do vampires have in Salem's Lot? How do you kill them? Salem's Lot vampires are traditional, so vampires can be repelled by white roses and garlic. To protect Barlow, Stryker bought all the white roses from the local flower shops. This idea comes from ancient stories where garlic and white roses are believed to be the strong defenses against vampires. Second, vampires need an invitation to enter and have hypnotic powers. While they can move around freely at night, they can only enter buildings if someone invites them in. Mark learns this in the film when vampire Danny uses his hypnotic powers to make Mark open the window for him. Third, vampire bites can be treated with a rabies vaccine. One surprising thing in Salem's Lot is that being bitten by a vampire doesn't have to be fatal. Dr. Cody gives herself a rabies shot to help fight the infection. This was exactly a good take on vampires. I haven't really seen that before, and I was even expecting that it would not work for Dr. Cody. Fourth, vampire can be killed with a wooden stake. Just like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the vampires in Salem's Lot are mostly killed by wooden stakes through the heart. While the vampires of Salem's Lot seem to be immune to most mortal perils, they follow a classic tradition in keeping their natural weaknesses to wooden stakes. Vampires cannot enter the church. Even beyond the need for invitations, vampires in Salem's Lot have a unique connection to consecrated ground. Holy places like churches are seemingly safe from vampires, as Ben and Dr. Cody discover when they use one as a sanctuary from a vampire attack. Vampires can be repelled by crosses. Crosses are powerful tools for the vampire hunters in Salem's Lot. Burke learns that crosses can repel vampires when one attacks him at home. The cross glows when a vampire is nearby. Lastly, and the most common one, vampires can be killed by sunlight. Like in many vampire stories, sunlight can kill the vampires in Salem's Lot. This becomes crucial in the film's climax when Mark dismantles the drive-in screen to expose the vampires to sunlight, killing many of them all at once. Who is Hubert Marson, the previous owner of the mansion Barlow bought? Hubert Marson, although dead before Salem's Lot begins, plays a key role in the story. He lived in the Marsten House where Kurt Barlow and Richard Stryker later stayed. The film mentions Hubert owned the house, worshipped Satan, and killed his wife, but his connection to Barlow goes deeper than that. Before moving to Salem's Lot, Hubert Marson had a shady past. In the 1920s, he ran a trucking company that was a front act for the Boston Mafia, making him wealthy. He was also a hired killer and committed many murders, including an 11-year-old boy, although he wasn't contracted for that one. By 1927, the Mafia viewed him as liability due to police inquiries. They kept him out of prison, but decided to sever ties. In 1928, Hubert and his wife Bertie moved into the Marsten House where they lived for 11 years. During this time, 4 children went missing, and given Hubert's violent history, author Ben Mears suspects he is responsible for their disappearance. For years, Hubert and Barlow sent letters to each other, with Hubert seemingly paving the way for Barlow to arrive in Jerusalem's Lot. Although the vampire did not arrive in the town decades after Hubert Marston's death. After doing unspeakable things to Bertie, his wife, Hubert eventually shot her in the head and then hanged himself. A 9-year-old Ben Mears snuck into the Marsten house and saw Hubert's body, an image that haunted Ben Mears for the rest of his life. What happens to Salem's Lot after killing Barlow? Is Barlow really dead? In the novel, Ben and Mark return to Salem's Lot a year after they killed Barlow and escape the vampire-infested town. Although the vampires are now leaderless, many still remain. To eliminate the remaining vampires and honor the family, friends, and neighbors they lost, Ben and Mark set the fire to town. This fire destroyed both the vampires in the Marsten house ending the evil it has caused. A key feature of Barlow and the vampire in Salem's Lot is the glowing eyes, which signals that Barlow is killed at the end of the film. When Ben drives a stake in Barlow's chest, the light in his house goes out, showing that he is permanently dead and can no longer harm other towns. All in all, Salem's Lot is an old-fashioned vampire story that I did not really enjoy and was not scared at all. It lacks the depth and originality that I'm looking for in a movie, although I like the cinematography. What do you think about Salem's Lot? Have you seen the old movie? Was it better? What's your favorite movie from Stephen King? Personally, I like The Mist. I like the ending and it stayed with me when I first watched it. Let me know, comment down below, and as always, thank you for watching and take care.